Today we're going to talk about inventions, and during this time period, there were literally thousands of things that were invented. Some were fairly meaningless that kind of faded away. Others still absolutely affect our lives today. It's nearly impossible to talk about many of them, so we're going to focus on three or four that were perhaps the most influential. And the place we start is electric power, and electric power is going to change the world. And the person we need to credit for this let me make that bigger, sorry, is Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison was a little bit different. He was an inventor, but this was his full-time job. He opened up a laboratory called Edison Labs, and he went out and he hired the best scientists he could find. And their goal was pretty simple: to invent. And they wanted to invent something minor every week and a major invention every 6 weeks. And you'll see from Edison's list here, most of them deal with electricity. The light bulb, which we'll talk about, the phonograph. The phonograph was the first device that played back recorded sound. If you can picture a record player, it was the thing that happened before the record player. The motion picture projector, storage batteries, electronic vote counters, wireless telegraph. Telegraph was what you had before the telephone. It sended coded messages over a wire. Edison didn't invent the telegraph, but he invented the technology so you didn't need wires to do that. So you could send a telegraph from a moving train, for instance. His company also helped produce the first electric chair. Anyway, his most well-known invention has to be the light bulb. Obviously, the light bulb was a source of light using electricity, and it replaced candles, kerosene lanterns, natural light, although it didn't really replace that. But before we have the light bulb, you have to rely on these things. And the light bulb actually made the world a safer place, because every year thousands of people in America died from fires due to candles, and in particular kerosene lamps. Kerosene is a flammable liquid, so if the lantern got knocked off a table, for instance, you would quickly have a huge fire. Light bulb allowed factories to go 24 hours a day. Before this, they would have to work sunrise to sunset, because then light would be an issue. So it absolutely changed the world. And this is what he said about the light bulb, because it took him so long to figure out the filament. The filament is the little thing in the middle that actually burns, that emits the light. And he said, "I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." So Edison, he has a light bulb, and that's great, but he needs something to produce electricity. So he also has to come up with the electric power plant, which is a factory, more or less, that generated electricity for light and power. And today, to make electricity, we have solar, we have wind, we have hydro, we have burning coal, we have a variety of sources. And the importance of this was, once he has this up and running, it's not just the light bulb, it's outlets on the wall that you can plug in machines to. And factories will completely change. Now they'll be run by electricity as opposed to water, as they had been, or steam engines. Okay, a couple more inventions. Two more. Scotland. I was born in Scotland in 1847. Throughout my life, I was dedicated to helping deaf and mute people. Early 1870s, I immigrated to the United States and taught at deaf schools in the Northeast. 1874, I began working on my invention. Excuse me. 1876, I had my first patent. I offered to sell the invention to another company for $100,000, but I was turned down. All of you love this invention a lot. Who am I and what did I invent? The invention is the telephone. And obviously the telephone was a communication device using voice. And the inventor was this man, Alexander Graham Bell. What he did when he invented this, he didn't want to manufacture telephones. He didn't want to start a telephone company. So he went to Western Union, which was a company, it was the biggest telegraph company, and he offered to sell his idea, to sell his patent to them for $100,000. And Western Union turned him down, and they said his device was too much like a toy and no one would ever use it. Obviously, that was a little bit of a misjudgment. He ended up starting his own phone company, Bell Phones, and he died one of the richest people in America. The importance, obviously, communication that we still use today. But early on, the phone, it took a while for it to take off. It was really expensive. Like a lot of new technologies, it was expensive. Really, for the first 50 years or so of the telephone, only businesses, the government, and the rich people had telephones. It probably wasn't until the 1940s that we begin to see telephones in everyone's homes. All right, last one. I was born in Indiana in 1867, never graduated high school. It was at this point I became interested in my invention. Others at the time were attempting to invent this, some were dying trying to invent this. The main issue with my invention was control. To solve this problem, I observed a certain animal which proved to be helpful. Began 1899, was not successful until 1903. First attempt only lasted 12 seconds. By the way, my brother helped me. Who am I and what did I invent? The airplane. Obviously, a machine that flew people over distances. This was the first airplane. You can see it looks nothing like a modern airplane. It was really dangerous. You had to lie down basically on the bottom wing, and the steering mechanism was in front of you. The problem people were having and the reason people were dying was not getting the plane to take off and get it out of the air. It was once it was in the air, maneuvering it, controlling it, steering it. That was the part that was kind of the engineering obstacle. The Wright brothers were the inventors. Kind of like the telephone, the airplane didn't change most people's lives immediately. Early on, it was primarily used for mail delivery. Later, the military will pick up on it. The airplane obviously will change war. And over time, it's going to be quicker for passengers. However, airplanes, what they really needed, the first airplanes had propellers in the front, which are fine. It's a perfectly reasonable way to fly an airplane, but with a propeller, they don't fly as quick and you have to refuel more often. So in the 1950s, early 60s, the jet engine was invented. And once the